which the woman has just vanished. Inspiration strikes. Fuck her, he says to himself as he pulls his knife out of the walker. He has her sword. He knows what he's going to do. He turns and starts back toward the others, formulating his story. The governor stands in the circle of vehicles, a single Coleman camp lantern glowing on a stump providing the only illumination in the dusty clearing at the top of the ridge, throwing a dim circle of pale yellow light on the other members of the militia tending to their wounds and taking stock of their supplies, when the sound of footsteps interrupts his thoughts. "What the fuck?" he mutters as he turns and sees the group of battle-weary figures trudging out of the woods directly behind him. Many heads turn, nerves are frayed from an increase in walker activity in the area, and many breathe a sigh of relief at the sight of humans. A stout man built like a Mack truck leads the ragtag brigade. Behind Gabe, two members of the scouting party, Raymond and Daniel, drag a fourth man, clad in black body armor and apparently wounded between them. The ailing prisoner, the woman called him Tyrese, drips blood from his lolling face and barely shuffles along with his huge arms over the shoulders of the two other men. Gloria Pine brings up the rear, carrying an armful of rifles and weapons. "Yep, we found him in the woods," Gabe reports as he walks up to the governor. "He and the woman attacked us. They killed Eric and Jim." The governor's expression hardens in the gloomy light of the lantern. "The woman? You talking about the hell bitch that tortured me?" Gabe gives him a nod. "Yep, the very same. We followed them into the woods. They put up a fight, but they couldn't hold us off for long." The other men drag the big black man around the stump and hold him up for the governor's inspection. Barely conscious, his visor gone, his face starting to swell from the beating, Tyrese tries to raise his head, but is a losing battle. He lets out a pained breath through clenched teeth. "Thought you might like a chance to sit down with this one," Gabe ventures, jerking a thumb at Tyrese. "Maybe have a little chat with him." The governor stares at the wounded giant. "The girl, Gabe. What happened with the girl?" "She broke away from us, took off for the woods. So I did you a favor." The governor cocks his head. "Favor? What the fuck are you talking about?" Gabe gives the governor a look. Neither a smile nor a grimace. The expression on the stocky man's face is hard to read. Finally he says, "I ran her down and blew her fucking brains out." A brief instant of silence follows, during which time Philip Blake braces himself against an unexpected storm of contradictory emotions smashing down on him. Relief, anger, morbid curiosity, disappointment, and more than anything else, suspicion. "You shot her in the head?" he asks at last. "You killed her?" "Yeah." Gabe looks into the governor's eyes, a prodigal son returning with the elixir, and the pause stretches. "She's fucking dead, boss." The governor thinks about it some more. "You saw her die?" He wants to know every detail. Wants to know the look on her face in her last moments. Wants to know that she suffered. Instead of asking about all these things, he simply says, "You witnessed it?" Gabe turns and looks over his shoulder. "Gloria!" The woman in the "I'm with stupid" visor comes forward, fumbling with her cache of weapons. Gabe explains. "The bitch ran away. She got pretty far. I saw her run. I shot her. I saw her fall down. I saw her stop moving." Gabe licks his lips, measuring his words carefully. "I'm sure it wasn't as slow and painful as you would have liked. But she's dead, boss." Gloria hands him something wrapped in a chamois-like cloth. "But before she got away from us..." Gabe takes the object, carefully unwraps it, and reveals it to the governor. "We took this." Gabe holds it up so that it gleams dully in the jaundiced yellow light. "Figured you would want a trophy." Gabe brandishes the katana sword with a flourish, holding it over his head at a parallel angle to the ground, looking somewhat foolish to the governor. Gaping at the thing, taking in all the implications, he breathes in a long breath. Then all at once he snatches the thing away from Gabe, and the rest of the scouts step back with a jerk. Gabe goes stone still, staring at the governor. Latent violence glitters in Philip's gaze as he squares his shoulders, raising the gleaming blade over his head. For a moment, Gabe's spine goes cold with terror. Then, with a decisive one-handed swing, Philip slams the tip of the sword down into the center of a tree stump, making a loud thwack. Another horrible moment of silence transpires, as the sword sticks rigidly out of the rotten timber like a flag planted on a summit. "Bring him over to my private office," the governor finally says, gesturing at the wounded man in body armor. "We'll have a little talk. We're on the same side, you and me," the governor says to the huge man sitting on the bench in the rear of the cargo vehicle. The airless enclosure reeks of sweat and the coppery stench of blood. A single fly-specked dome light shines down on the steel tread plate floor as the governor paces, his boots ringing on the iron. "You realize that, don't you?" The black man slumps against the wall in his battered black Kevlar, his hands bound behind his back, his swollen face drooping forward and from side to side. He spits bloody saliva on the floor and manages to look up, his grizzled ebony visage screwed up with pain and rage. "Really? What side is that?" "The side of survival, homie." The governor flings his words at the man, trying to get a rise out of him, trying to provoke him. "We're all in the same boat, fighting for our lives. Am I wrong, Holmes?" The black man swallows and looks into the governor's eyes, replying in a very low, taut voice, as though on the verge of a scream. "The name's Tyrese." "Tyrese. Tyrese. I like that." The governor paces. "Okay, Tyrese. Let me ask you a question, and be honest." The black man spits again. "Whatever. I got nothing to hide. We could torture the shit out of you, make your last moments a living hell, all that good stuff, but come on. Do we really need to go through that dance again? I hurt you real bad, take you to the point of passing out, but not quite, and when you refuse to talk, I break you, flay the skin off you or something, blah, blah, blah. Do we really need to go through that ridiculous shit again?" The big man looks up and fixes his gaze on the governor and says, "Have at it." The governor slaps him, hard. A sharp, forceful backhand slap from his gloved left hand, violent and abrupt, enough to slam the back of the man's skull against the wall behind him, making Tyrese gasp and blink as though snorting smelling salts. "Wake up, man!" The governor maintains a cheerful, helpful, benevolent tone. "You're not thinking this through. I'm just saying." Tyrese takes heaving breaths, trying to control his rage and blink away the pain. His enormous shoulders tremble under the battered armor. "Fuck you." "Tyrese, come on." Now the governor sounds disappointed, crestfallen. "Don't make this one of those annoying situations where I gotta hurt you real bad, worse than you ever been hurt. A few simple questions is all." Tyrese sniffs away the pain. "What do you want to know? Weak spots in the prison, for instance." Tyrese chuckles then, a wry, weary, amused chuckle that lasts for several moments. Then he looks up. "There ain't no weak spots. It's a fucking prison, Sherlock. How about you tell me how many people you got up in there? What kind of arsenal you got, ammunition, supplies? What kind of power you running?" The black man looks at him. How about you eat shit and die? The governor stares at the man for a moment, then winds up to hit him again, this time with a balled-up fist, but right before he swings, the sound of knocking interrupts. Somebody is tapping on the doorframe outside the truck's tarp-covered rear hatch. "Governor?" It's Lily's voice, and the sound of it sends a warning alarm like icy water trickling down the governor's spine. He chews on the inside of his cheek for a brief instant before answering, thinking it over. Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe she should see this, see the brutality in the man's dark eyes, see who they're fighting. "Come in here, Lily," Philip says at last. "You can be a witness." The tarp folds inward, and Lily Caw climbs up into the enclosure. She wears a tattered denim jacket, her hair pulled back from her suntanned face, which is shiny with sweat and bright with nervous tension. She keeps her distance, watching from the rear. The big man on the bench glances up at her, breathing hard, trying to control his emotions. He looks as though he's on the verge of exploding. The governor sees that the man is about to lose it and leans down close to him, staring into his eyes. Tyrese looks up at him. The governor smiles and speaks softly, as if to a child. "Lily, meet Tyrese. Nice enough fella. Good head on his shoulders. I was just trying to talk some sense into him, seeing if there was a way he could talk to this Rick fella, get him to wise up and surrender, so we could all avoid more bloodshed and—" The big man lunges suddenly, putting all of his 275 pounds into the move, slamming his forehead into the governor's face. The headbutt, instantaneous and brutal, sounds like a board snapping, taking the governor completely by surprise, knocking him momentarily insensate, and sending him flinging backward against the wall. He slams into the struts with a gasp and then topples to the floor. Lily draws her Ruger and aims it at the big man. "Get back!" She thumbs the safety off. "Get back, goddammit, now! Sit down!" Tyrese sits back down, his wrists still bound, and he exhales angrily, his face twitching with rage. His thigh drips blood from the gunshot wound, but he barely seems to notice it. A former NFL linebacker, as well as a bouncer for some of the toughest bars in Atlanta, he looks like he could snap Lily in two. His grizzled face remains stoic as he spits blood from a split lip, looking down and shaking his head. He mumbles something inaudible. Lily goes over to the governor, kneels, and helps him sit up. "You okay?" The governor blinks and tries to get his bearings, tries to draw breath into his lungs. His forehead is bleeding, and he coughs convulsively, but the pain braces him, galvanizes him, energizes him. See what I'm talking about?" he utters thickly. "You can't reason with these people. You can't bargain with them. They're fucking animals." Across the enclosure, the big man mutters something else, his head down. Lily and the governor look up. Tyrese speaks under his breath as though talking to himself. "And the nations were angry." "What was that, asshole?" The governor snarls at him. "You want to share with the rest of the class?" Tyrese looks up at them, his dark face filling with sullen, baleful hate. "And the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and it shall be the time of the dead that they should be judged. And to them that fear my name, small and great, thou shouldest destroy them which destroyed the earth, and there will be war in heaven." He pauses and looks at them. "It's from Revelation. Not that you would know shit about the Bible. It's what's happening. You can't turn back the tide. You've opened the door. Kiss your asses goodbye. You'll die by your own fucking swords, and you don't even—" "Shut up!" Lily springs to her feet, lunges toward Tyrese, and presses the Ruger's muzzle against his forehead. "Just shut the fuck up!" The governor lifts himself to his feet, moving in between Lily and Tyrese. "Okay, let's dial it down now. Back off, Lily, I got this." He gently ushers Lily away from the prisoner toward the rear hatch. "It's okay, I got this. I'll take care of it. Lily, breathing hard, stands in the hatchway, re-engaging the safety and shoving the gun back into its sheath on her hip. I'm sorry. Don't worry about it, the governor says, giving her a reassuring pat on the arm. He wipes the blood from his forehead. I'll handle this. You go and try and get some sleep. Lily looks at him. You sure you're okay? I'm good. I got this. Don't worry. After a long pause, she glances back at the prisoner, who now sits staring at the floor. She lets out a pained sigh and makes her exit. The governor turns and looks at Tyrese. Very softly under his breath, Philip Blake murmurs, I got this. He goes over to the bench facing the prisoner on the opposite side of the enclosure. Under the bench, in the cobwebs and litter, Philip finds a baseball bat lying next to a pile of rags. I got this, he says in barely a whisper as he picks up the bat, then goes over to the rear hatch and pulls down the metal door. The door clangs shut, giving them privacy. The governor turns to the prisoner. Philip smiles at the man. I got this. Very few surviving members of the Woodbury militia get any sleep that night, least of all Gabe. Tossing and turning on a hard pallet in the back of his cargo truck, his rotund barrel-shaped belly wedged between the wall and a row of supply crates, he tries to clear his mind, but his brain revs and chugs and circles back around to his lies. How many times has he lied since the plague broke out? He's lost track. But this latest lie could truly bite him on the ass. The bitch with the hair braids is still out there. What will the governor do when he finds out? Gabe wonders if he should bail out of this whole fracas with the prison people. He tosses and turns some more. The drone of crickets and frogs and loons outside the truck rises and swells in the dark until it sounds positively thunderous to Gabe, like a rainstorm, and he puts his hands over his ears and tries to drive the thoughts away. His stomach burns and seethes with nervous indigestion. He's been having upper GI problems for months now, a combination of the shitty diet he's been on and the constant stress, and now he feels stick pins stabbing him in the guts, piercing his innards. He tries to breathe evenly, deeply, and eventually the breathing exercise sends him into a half-comatose doze in which he dreams snippets of night terrors such as the black lady with the dreadlocks sneaking up on him and driving her katana sword into his abdomen just above the belly button and then swizzling it around as though trying to open a doorway in his guts, and he tries to scream in the dream but nothing but silent air will come out of him, and he wakes up right around dawn with a gasp. Somebody is knocking on the rear hatch, and Gabe blinks at the pale light filtering through the tarp, and the sound of a deep, smoky baritone voice. Hey! Gabe, get your fat ass up! I need you right now! The governor appears in the back hatch of the cargo truck as Gabe is struggling off the pallet, clutching for his wadded turtleneck shirt and starting to get dressed. I'm up, boss. What do you need? Tell you on the way. Grab your AR-15 and give me a hand with the big dude. Gabe follows the governor across the clearing to a transport truck. Inside the passenger hold, the man named Tyrese is barely alive, curled into a fetal position on the floor of the payload bay, his body armor gone, his wrists still bound by rope and wire, his flesh battered and scourged by the governor's constant assault throughout the night with the baseball bat. Now the man barely draws a breath, both his eyes swollen shut, his lips cracked and bleeding, mouthing silent litanies, prayers, apocalyptic Bible quotes that nobody can hear. The governor and Gabe lift the man onto a bench, not an easy task considering the 275 pounds of nearly dead weight. Then they tie his wrists to the wall. The governor covers the man with a tarp and mutters, "We'll unwrap the present when we get there." Gabe looks at Philip. Get where? Philip lets out a sigh. Ah, you are one stupid motherfucker, Gabe. They hop out of the rear hatch and go around to the cab, Gabe climbing behind the wheel, Philip taking the passenger seat. Philip orders Gabe to take it nice and slow, no headlights, and they pull out of the clearing, unnoticed by everyone but Lily. She appears in their path in the pre-dawn glow like a ghost waving them to a stop. Gabe pulls up to her and rolls down his window. "What do you want, Lily?" "What are you doing?" "Where the hell are you going?" Lily peers into the cab and sees the governor. "Let me come with you. I'll get my guns. Just give me a second." "No!" From the passenger seat, the governor leans forward and makes eye contact with her. "You stay here and keep an eye on things. We're going to go and try and negotiate with them. Use the big boy's leverage." Lily nods slowly, reluctantly. "Okay. But be careful, you're going to be outnumbered." "Let us worry about that." The governor gives her a wink. "You hold down the fort." They take off in a cloud of dust as Lily watches from the shadows. She realizes right then, for some reason with mounting dread, that Michonne's sword was leaning against the governor's hip as they drove off. They arrive at the prison at 6:53 a.m., according to the clock on the truck's dash, barreling through a cluster of walkers wandering the tall grass east of the grounds. The truck's grill smashes through groups of reanimated cadavers with a series of watery thuds and brittle bones cracking beneath the massive wheels. On Philip's orders, Gabe blows the air horn once, waking anybody who might still be slumbering inside the gray stone cell blocks behind the razor wire. Gabe pulls up close to the east fence and then makes a huge U-turn. He rolls his window down and grabs the .38 Special lodged under the dash, firing out the side of the truck at a few stray biters. Heads snap back in mists of blood and brain tissue, at least a half dozen more going down in sequence like bowling pins. "Now back it up to the fence," the governor orders, peering out his side mirror. Gabe slams on the brakes, then wrestles the stick into reverse and makes a big show of revving the engine and backing toward the chain link as if they have a pizza to deliver. A blur of movement catches the corner of Gabe's eye in his mirror as he navigates the truck closer and closer to the fence. The inhabitants of the prison dashing across gaps between the buildings, waking each other up, scurrying for their weapons. Over the noise of the diesel engine, Gabe can hear the faint shouts of alarm. The truck clatters to a stop less than 10 feet from the outer fence. "Let's do this," the governor murmurs as he kicks open his door and climbs out. The two men calmly step off the running boards and then stride around to the rear of the truck. The katana sword, tucked into its scabbard, bounces off the governor's hip as he reaches up and pulls open the hatch. Gabe feels the eyes of both walkers and humans on the back of their necks. Before climbing up into the cargo bay, the governor mutters under his breath, "Keep the fucking biters off us long enough for me to finish, okay?" "Will do," Gabe says, and slams a magazine into the AR's receiving port. He thumbs the safety as the governor climbs up into the cargo enclosure. The tarp comes off the dazed black man with the abruptness of a Band-Aid being torn off a wound. Tyrese still breathes shallow breaths, his eyes swollen to slits. He tries to see, and makes a feeble attempt to move, but the pain keeps him docile. He makes a choking noise deep in his throat as the governor yanks him to his feet. "It's showtime, Holmes," Philip whispers, with the tenderness one might proffer to a sick animal on the way to the veterinarian. Chapter 14. Inside the barricade of razor wire and tall cyclone fencing, many shadowy figures suddenly stop in their tracks, many pairs of eyes fixing themselves on the unexpected sight of their comrade being displayed in the back of a truck in full view of the prison. The governor has positioned the dazed black man on the edge of the truck's rear hatch, on his knees, facing the prison complex, head drooping, the strange tableau almost reminiscent of some obscure Asian death-cleansing ritual. The rear hatch and the truck's cargo area have momentarily become a theatrical stage. The big man's wrists are still bound, his head drooping as though it weighs a ton. The silence spreads across the grounds like a black tide. The wind tosses the governor's hair across his eye patch as he dramatically draws the gleaming sword from its sheath. "Before anyone gets trigger-happy," he calls out to those inside the ramparts, holding the sword over the hunched figure of Tyrese. "Know that I've got the woman, too." He takes in the stillness, the silence. "My fat friend and I don't get back to our camp in one piece. She dies." He pauses for a moment to allow this prefatory matter to settle in. "So no sudden moves, okay?" Again he pauses, hearing his voice echo across the warrens of passageways and cell blocks. He interprets the overwhelming silence as cooperation and nods. "From that, I think you can see where this is going. Open the gates. Get in this truck and come back with us, or I'd do something horrible to your friend." The governor lets this sink in, and then starts to say something else when a sharp movement inches away from him yanks his attention down to the prisoner. Tyrese jerks his head up with great effort and peers through swollen eyes out the rear hatch at the prison grounds. "Don't let him in." The voice that comes out of him is strangled with pain, garbled by blood in the back of his throat. "Don't." Philip smashes the blunt end of the sword down on the back of the man's skull, hard enough to make a cracking sound and drive the man to the corrugated iron floor. Tyrese lets out a half-grunt, half-moan. "Shut up!" Philip gazes down at the man as though looking at garbage. "Shut your fucking mouth!" Then he looks back up at the barren, silent prison grounds. "So what's it gonna be, people?" He waits for a moment, the sound of Tyrese's ragged breathing the only audible sound. "You have 1 minute to decide." An endless minute passes, and over the course of that time the governor realizes he's being watched from every quarter of the property. A small cluster of figures huddling behind one of the guard towers, another group lurking inside a dark alcove of the main cell block, a few scattered at opposite ends of the yards, all eyes fixed on him. Some of the people aim weapons, while others frantically whisper and argue. But in very short order, the verdict becomes clear to Philip. He knows what he has to do. "So that's it, then." He feels a tingling sensation at the base of his spine. That familiar clarion ringing in his brain. A red shade coming down over his solitary eye. His skin prickles and his mind goes still. The great silent cobra calm before the strike. The first blow comes down decisively, yet slightly impeded by the uncoordinated tendons of Philip's left arm. He has to awkwardly twist his body to get a good angle, and the blade buries itself a mere 1.5 inches into the man's neck. Tyrese lets out a strangled hiss. His entire body hunches suddenly as if electrocuted. "Fuck!" the governor grumbles under his breath, as the blood sluices around the beveled edge of the katana sword, the blade caught in the cords and cartilage of the big man's nape. The faint gasps and moaning sounds coming from within the confines of the prison barely register in Philip's ears. He puts a boot on the man's shoulders and yanks the blade free with a watery smacking noise. All the fight instantly drains out of the big man as though someone flipped a switch, the shock paralyzing him, keeping him pinned to the floor of the cargo bay, his head shuddering as major arteries disconnect from their moorings. Tyrese sags lower, but somehow, in his involuntary stiffening, his nervous system shutting down, he manages to remain on his elbows and knees, his face pressed to the cold floor now, his arms and haunches trembling in their death throes, his lungs heaving as he drowns in the tremendous hemorrhage soaking the rusty platform beneath him. The governor raises the sword for a second blow, and this time he brings it down harder. The blade sinks halfway through the man's thick neck, blood gushing now with the force of a geyser, arcing up through the air, sluicing down until it floods the entire cargo hold. And this time, the governor can hear the startled gasps from inside the fences. He yanks the blade back. Tyrese collapses. His head lolling, barely connected now, he lands at an awkward angle, his lifeless face pressed against the blood-sodden iron floor, the gaping maw of his neck now displaying the coils and strands of his circulatory system as it pulses futilely. Other than a few post-mortem twitches and ticks of the big man's musculature, he lies still, gone, his spirit flown. With a flourish, the governor delivers the final blow, the massive force causing catastrophic damage to the enormous man's neck, sending a font of blood spurting up. The blowback spatters the governor as the head finally detaches. The expression frozen on the unmoored face is almost tranquil as the head wobbles free, its eyes frozen shut with a strange look of deliverance. The head rolls a few centimeters from its former spindle, which now releases a torrent of blood like a baptismal font flowing over the edge of the rear gate. Winded from all the exertion, taking in huge breaths, huffing and wheezing, the governor steps back from the horrible spectacle, the sword still gripped in his left hand. Even at this distance, he can hear the traumatized mutterings coming from inside the prison. It sounds like white noise on the wind, the sound of revulsion mixed with despair, and it fuels Philip's rage. He kicks the loose cranium off the ledge of the rear gate, and the severed head goes bouncing off into the tall grass, rolling nearly 20 yards before coming to a stop face down. Philip shoves the blood-drenched remains of Tyrese's body off the rear as well, the massive form flopping to the earth with a wet, hollow thud. By this point, Gabe has moved back toward the truck's cab, his watchful eyes on the dozens of walkers shambling this way from the north and the west, drawn to all the hubbub. He opens the driver's side door as Philip hops off the blood-slick rear ledge and circles around the truck. "We'll leave his body for the biters," Philip mutters as he walks calmly toward the cab. He doesn't hurry. He doesn't show any fear. He approaches Gabe and says, "Let's roll before the biters get too close. One of these shell-shocked fucks decides to—" The dry, harsh clap of a high-powered rifle cuts off his voice, and the governor instinctively ducks down as the first shot rings off the front fender, dimpling the steel and sending a rosette of sparks into the air. "Fuck! Fuck!" The governor stays down on the ground as more shots are fired, another 3 high-caliber rounds, puncturing the quarter panel and raising puffs along the ground mere centimeters from Philip's head. He crawls around the front of the truck as Gabe slams the driver's side door and fires up the engine. "Drive, goddammit! Drive!" the governor booms after climbing in the shotgun side. The truck lurches, and a cloud of dust swirls after it as Gabe slams the pedal to the floor and makes a beeline for the main road a quarter-mile away. Within seconds, they have crossed the adjacent pasture and screeched back onto the south road, vanishing into the early morning heat rays as abruptly as they arrived. 2 figures stand sentry at the threshold of the dusty clearing as Gabe pulls the truck back up the winding access road leading to the temporary camp. Raymond Hilliard and Lily Call stand on opposite sides of the road, hands on their hips, the sun blazing down on the circle of military vehicles behind them. They each look worried. Gabe drives past them, pulls the cargo truck across the clearing, and parks next to the tank. He turns off the engine with a sigh of relief. The governor has already climbed out his side and sees the 2 sentries approaching. "Well?" Raymond Hilliard speaks first, taking off his falcon's cap and wiping the sweat from his bald pate. How'd it go?" "How did it go?" the governor says, not even breaking stride, walking angrily past the man. The katana scabbard bounces on his hip as he walks. "It didn't go well, that's how. It didn't fucking work!" Raymond watches the man head back toward the temporary tent set up on the edge of the clearing for supplies. Lily hurries after him. "What happened?" she asks, catching up with Philip and gently grabbing his left arm. He pauses and burns his gaze into her. Gabe standing behind him, looking sheepish and guilty. "We tried to get them to open the gates. Trade their man for access inside. We even threatened the man's life." The governor holds Lily's stare, his single dark glittering eye radiating madness at her. "These crazy, evil sons of bitches shot their own man." Behind Philip, Gabe lowers his head, stares awkwardly at the ground. "We had a bit of leverage, and so they shot their own guy in the fucking head." Lily gapes, mumbling. "Why the fuck? They killed him, so we couldn't use him against them." The governor stares at her. "You follow me? You understand what we're dealing with here?" By this point, others have gathered behind Lily to listen to the news. 11 weekend warriors standing slack-jawed and stunned, their eyes telling the story. This is more than they bargained for. This is closer to the bone than any of them have ever ventured. Gloria Pine looks down and kicks the dirt, turning things over in her mind. Raymond Hilliard pushes his way between Gus and Gabe and says to the governor, "So, what do we do now?" The governor slowly turns, aiming his one good eye at the man like a beacon, and says very softly, very coldly, "What do we do?" Raymond Hilliard gives a terse little nod, the nod of a lost child. The governor snarls, "We fucking kill every last one of them. That's what we fucking do." Lily clenches her fists at the unexpected cymbal crash of the governor's voice. The clenching is involuntary at this point, her gaze riveted to Philip Blake. He backs away from Lily and turns to the group. He looks down at the katana sword gripped in his hand as if he's forgotten it's there. He speaks in a dry, flat monotone as he stares at the sword's fine craftsmanship. "No more waiting. No more stalling. It's time to finish this." He sniffs suddenly, blinking as though from an electric shock. A rustling noise comes from behind him, Gabe mumbling something under his breath, but he barely notices it. "We move now!" The others stand paralyzed for a moment, like totems in the morning light which dapples the ground around them with fiery yellow pools. They stare and stare, their mouths agape, some of them swallowing hard or reaching for their guns. The governor swishes the sword through the air. "Now!" He stares at them. "Get in your cars. Load your fucking guns and let's move. We're taking these monsters down. Ridding the world of their evil right here, right now." He looks at their pallid, ashen expressions. "What the fuck is wrong with you people? You heard me? Get your shit together and let's move!" Nobody budges. The governor hears a quick inhalation of air coming from Gabe, and he turns and looks at the stocky, thick-necked man in the turtleneck. "What the hell is your problem?" Gabe struggles to say something, gazing off at the shadows behind a nearby cargo truck. The same shadows from which a dark figure has just lunged, taking everybody by surprise. The governor sees Gabe's eyes shifting toward the area around the cargo truck behind them, but before Philip even has a chance to turn around, he feels the unmistakable kiss of cold blue steel against the back of his neck, just above his upper vertebrae. Philip remains still, the barrel of a high-powered rifle pressing hard against his neck cords. He lets out a puff of air in a single, strangled word. "Fuck!" Gabe is the closest to the assailant, and he licks his lips cautiously before saying anything. A player in a deadly game of chess, the starter clock now beginning to tick, his hand on the butt of his spare semi-automatic wedged between his belt and his hip. "Okay. You're not stupid," he says very softly to the invader standing behind Philip. "You gotta know if you do kill him, you're gonna be going down next." "Yes. I'm aware of that," the familiar voice replies inches away from Philip's left ear. It's a woman's voice, calm and measured as a telephone operator. The sound of it stiffens the governor's spine. Very slowly, very subtly, the onlookers standing around the clearing begin to reach down for their pistols or carefully thumb the safeties off their assault rifles. "Okay. Do the math," Gabe says to the woman with as much sincerity and reason as he can muster. "You see how many of us there are, and basically you're surrounded, so, it's kinda academic." "You really think I care?" she says. She wears her body armor secured around her slender form, and has a samurai-style headband wrapped tight around her cascading dreadlocks. She holds an AK-47 on the governor, a weapon capable of firing 100 rounds of 7.62 millimeter hellfire per minute. "You think I haven't planned for that?" She lets out an amused grunt. Philip hasn't moved 1 millimeter since the conversation began. The woman says, "You're the stupid one." "Really?" Gabe smiles, drawing his .45 in one easy movement. "That a fact?" "Gabe, don't." The governor's single eye gazes with fiery intensity at the barrel of Gabe's semi-auto coming up in the air. "Gabe, you got a death wish, lady?" Gabe aims the gun at the general vicinity of the governor's head. "Fine. I'll grant you that wish." "Gabe!" The booming report of the .45 shatters the still air at the precise moment Michonne's rifle roars, making her jerk from the recoil 1 nanosecond before Gabe's metal-jacketed hollow-point bullet strikes her shoulder piece, chewing a divot in the Kevlar and sending a chunk flying. The governor is already convulsed forward and gets grazed in the lower mandible just under his wounded ear. The noise drives everybody in the area down to their bellies or behind the nearest cover as the tense tableau explodes apart in a blur of lightning-quick movements. Actions and reactions, one tumbling into another. The slapback reports echoing and rising in the sky. The governor instantly ends up on the ground, the wind knocked out of him, his bloody drool flinging across the earth, the sword flying out of his hand. Michonne moves with the feral grace of a panther as she dives for the sword, the other combatants getting their bearings now. Lily comes up behind the front quarter panel of the cargo truck with her Ruger gripped in both hands, the Weaver position that Bob taught her, the Israeli commando tactics almost second nature to her now, and she scans for the dark figure in her front sight. Gabe, on the ground now, fires wildly at the blur of motion while he simultaneously crawls towards the fallen governor, emptying the .45's entire clip, unable to hit anything but the heels of Michonne's jackboots. By this point, Michonne has gotten her gloved hands around the finely tooled handle of the ninja sword and is spinning sideways toward Raymond Hilliard, who is backing away with his AR-15 jerking sideways and up and down, seeking a target. In one fluid movement, Michonne spins and slashes, opening a gap in Raymond's midsection with silent efficiency. A tide of blood spumes down Raymond's lap as he cries out and drops his gun and tumbles backward to the ground. And now several things transpire with the flickering dreamlike speed of a nightmare and the harsh rays of sunlight stabbing through the trees. The other militia members have scattered for cover, alarmed by the advent of that gleaming deadly sword, while Gabe has climbed on top of the fallen governor to provide a human shield. Meanwhile, Michonne is spun behind the trunk of an ancient live oak with her assault rifle raised and ready now, and she opens up on the stragglers. With one hand, she sprays armor-piercing shells across the cracked earth of the clearing, raising chunks of turf, puckering the steel of adjacent trucks, sparks pinging and blooming off fenders, sending bark chips flying and generally gobbling the clearing in a maelstrom of fire and hot lead. The governor, pinned to the ground beneath the portly Gabe, slams his eyes shut as dust and sparks spit all around him. And then, just like a switch has been thrown, the assailant is gone. The silence that abruptly follows the barrage takes everyone by surprise. The fusillade has ceased as suddenly as it began, and for several moments, the governor lies with his face in the dirt, the cold sting from his wounded jaw spreading down his spine. "Get the fuck off me!" he hisses at last, wriggling under the massive lump of his bodyguard. "The girl, goddammit! The girl!" Gabe rolls off Philip, struggling to his feet and quickly scans the perimeter, simultaneously ejecting the spent clip from his .45, chucking in a fresh mag and releasing the slide. He lowers the gun. Shit. He looks in all directions and sees that the girl has vanished. Shit. Shit. The governor climbs to his feet, holding his gloved hand over the deep gash along his jawline, the blood seeping through his fingers. He looks around the clearing. In the blue haze of cordite, he sees Raymond lying in a spreading pool of blood, the others cautiously coming out of their hiding places, frazzled, angry and scared. Lily steps out from behind a vehicle, her gaze riveted on the governor. Without even a glance at her Ruger, she dumps the empty mag on the ground, her furrowed expression fixed on Philip. She breathes heavily, her lips trembling with rage, her eyes blazing with anger. She looks as though she would follow Philip into hell now. Philip turns to Gabe, who's still surveying the periphery as though Michonne might materialize out of thin air at any moment. Then Gabe notices the governor staring at him with baleful intensity. Gabe swallows hard.
"Boss, that's what it was like."
Philip interrupts in a low, thick growl, his voice dripping with contempt, his gloved hand still pressed to his jaw, barely stanching the bleeding gash.
"Last time you blew her fucking brains out? Was it just like that?"
"Boss," Gabe starts to explain, but stops himself when he sees the governor raising a bloody gloved hand.
"I don't want to hear it."
Philip jerks his thumb at the others.
"Get them ready to roll. We're gonna end this thing now. Right fucking now."
With Austin at her side, Lily orders every last crate of ammunition opened and loaded into weapons, every last ounce of fuel poured into tanks, every ammo clip filled, every available piece of body armor put on and secured. She has Gus tend to the governor's wound, using the dissolving sutures in the first aid kit to do a quick field stitch. She checks all the radios, checks all the vehicles, all the tires, all the engines, all the batteries, all the fluids, all the gun turrets, the scopes, the binoculars, the helmets, the visors, and the incidental supplies. Her pulse quickens as she nears completion of the last few preparations, the gravity of the situation quickly taking hold of her. It feels different this time. Hate is a microbe that passes from one host to another, and it has passed fully from the governor to Lily. She hates these people now like never before. Enough to launch a slaughter, enough to wipe them off the face of the earth. She hates them for what they have done to her town, her future, her hope for a better life. She hates them for their brutality. She hates them for what they have taken from her. Lily's life is meaningless now in the grand scheme of things. Nothing has meaning anymore but her hate. Lily has gone completely inward to the other side, completely self-contained and ready to kill. Ready to burn these motherfuckers to the ground. At one point, Austin notices her unfamiliar aura as she loads extra magazines into the truck's cab for easy access. She has 2 sniper rifles tucked behind her seat. "Hey, you okay?" he asks, giving her a tender pat on the shoulder.
"What's with the humming?"
She pauses, looking at him.
"Humming?
You were humming to yourself. Didn't recognize the song, but it struck me as kind of weird." She wipes her face. All around the clearing, engines are firing up, gouts of exhaust spewing from tailpipes. Doors slam, gunners climb into place on the backs of turrets, and the governor stands on his beloved tank watching it all, looking stiff and pale, blanched of all humanity like a golem rising from the mud. It takes Lily's breath away. She wants to see him tear limbs off these people, chew their jugulars out with his teeth, burn the prison to ashes, and then bury the ashes and seed the ground with fucking salt. "Get in, pretty boy," Lily says at last, climbing behind the wheel. "We got a fucking job to do." They pull out of camp at just before noon, the sun high and pale in the sky. Austin doesn't say much en route, just sits in the passenger seat, cradling his Garand in his lap, every once in a while glancing out at the side mirror to check on the 4 soldiers riding in the back. Lily drives in silence, feeling a strange sort of calm. In every transaction, the person willing to lose everything has the advantage. Lily has nothing else to live for but her hate, and this strength makes her flesh tingle as the convoy climbs the winding access road toward the eastern horizon. She slams the shift lever into the lower gears and hums a tuneless tune, more of a tick than an actual melody. She glances across the cab at Austin, and all at once something flutters in her gut, a jolt of unease nagging at the back of her mind, pinching her midsection and shattering her confidence. His head down, his hair hanging in his face. Austin Ballard has never looked younger or more vulnerable to Lily than he does at this moment. And it wakes her up, breaks through her stupor and sends an unexpected wave of dread coursing through her. His life is on the line as well, and the realization crashes down on her. He's not ready for this. He's not equipped. And this revelation leads to another unexpected bombshell. At first she sees it out of the corner of her eye, and she's not sure anybody else in the regiment of vehicles notices it. Just as the procession of vehicles crests the top of the ridge east of the prison, and the wide scabrous slope of pasture land bordering the property comes into view through the trees, in the middle distance a few dozen dead straggling across the meadow in the front of the prison. Lily sees faint signs of movement on either side of the dirt road, way back in the shadows of the woods, blending in with the dark columns of pines, milling through the gloom with the hectic purpose of ants in an ant farm. Scores and scores of walkers, maybe hundreds of them, have converged on the area, drawn over the last 36 hours to the commotion of the skirmishes, their number now multiplying like amoebas growing in the vast petri dish of the forest. Lily knows what this means. She's tangled with herds of undead before. Autumn of last year, during the ill-advised coup d'etat attempt on Woodbury, a herd had engulfed Lily's band of conspirators in the woods like a tidal wave, nearly overturning their van and devouring everything within miles. Lily knows all too well how unpredictable and dangerous herds can be, especially if they coalesce into a slow-motion stampede. In their legion of stubborn, clumsy, shuffling bodies, they can mow down the sturdiest barricade, turn settlements to rubble, and break through the fences of any prison. In that one horrible instant, as the convoy crosses over the ridge and vehicle by vehicle starts down the slope, Lily's brain registers a dark truth. She realizes at last the difference between this assault and the last. Now both sides are fucked. Chapter 15. The people in the prison are prepared this time. The convoy barely gets halfway across the pasture before the yards light up with heavy fire, taking the invasion force by surprise. Air brakes hiss, windshield shatter, ricochets shriek off iron and steel. Trucks skid on the damp turf. Drivers and passengers alike duck down for cover, some of them diving off flatbeds and belly-crawling under the chassis of the massive transports. Lily slams on her brakes and brings the truck to a shuddering stop and screams for Austin to get out in case the fuel tanks go up in the barrage. She kicks the door open, lurching out of the cab and hitting the ground, a series of divots exploding in the dirt around her. She can't see anything. Austin has vanished out the other side of the cab. Over the din of the gunfire, Lily can barely hear the governors ranting and raving somewhere in the gathering haze of gun smoke and dust, but she can't locate his position. She tries to fumble with a rifle and maybe return fire. Some of the militia members are making feeble attempts to answer the salvo, but Lily's hands won't obey the signals her brain is sending to them. The people in the prison have taken positions behind parked vehicles, on their stomachs, firing from underneath the cars, causing mass chaos now, taking down more and more of Woodbury's beleaguered militia. Lily hears Gabe's baritone voice barking frantically, hollering above the noise, arguing with the governor, demanding to know why these insane tactics are going to work this time. Lily covers her head as the turf continues to get chewed up around her, puffing up clods from the relentless bombardment. She tries to take deep breaths and focus on her weapon and her rage and her meager training, but something else is intruding on her thoughts. Out of the corner of her eyes, she sees the edges of the battlefield filling up with ragged, stumbling figures, and her chest freezes with the realization. There's countless more of them now, coming from every direction, descending upon the meadow like a moving plague. Lily manages to crawl under the M35. She sees Austin's feet shuffling next to the cab. He's struggling to rise up and return fire, and she calls out above the noise for him to get the fuck down and get under the fucking truck for fuck's sake. Walkers have surrounded them, most of them managing to shamble between the gunshots or turn away from the bullet-riddled fences and lumber toward the invaders. Lily starts firing at Walker feet, knocking them down and then systematically sending slugs into their crania. Skulls pop out like fuses overloading, sending blood stringers across the grass and onto Lily's arms and legs, but she keeps firing. The ragged figures continue dragging themselves toward the invaders, and Lily keeps blasting away until her clip clicks dry, and a cloud of blue haze builds around her truck. Her heart drumming in her chest. Lily suddenly feels a vice tighten around her ankle. She lets out a yelp of shock and she looks down at her lower half. A large male walker in a funeral suit has crawled under the truck and has her leg in his black and gnarled hands, his rotting mouth opening, the mossy green teeth inches away from the exposed flesh of her slender shin between the top of her boot and the cuffed leg of her jeans, and the sight of it paralyzes her for a moment. She swings the barrel of the Ruger down at the thing's skull and pulls the trigger, forgetting that the gun needs a fresh mag, the feeder slide gaping open, and now nothing but a click issues from the empty gun. Lily screams and kicks and scrambles for the magazine in her belt when a third figure fills the narrow space under the M35, just a dark blur at first, and then the gleaming blue steel of Austin's Glock. A flare of a spark and the flat blast puts the male biter down in a gushing stream of oily fluid from its freshly breached skull, spreading across the matted grass under the truck, the stench of the dead now engulfing Lily as she lets out a pained, shocked sigh of relief. Austin crawls over to her. "You okay? Did he get you? Did he nick you? You all right?" Austin babbles, putting his arm around her, tenderly wiping away the damp tendrils of hair loosened from her ponytail. Lily manages a nod, swallowing back the coppery taste of acid in her throat. The noise of another volley from all around them makes it impossible to be heard. She twists back around and reaches for her rifle, crawling out from underneath the truck. The air has gotten so thick with cordite and crisscrossing gunfire. It looks as though night has rolled in, and it chokes the breath out of Lily, numbing her senses, making her eyes water. She positions herself against the cab. She tries to get her bearings back, slamming another clip into the Ruger pistol, shoving it into her belt, and then swinging the Remington around into shooting position. Austin huddles behind her, aiming the Garand at the sparking, flaring gunfire coming from inside the fences. Lily is lifting the scope to her eye, when all at once she sees a tiny object floating up through space above the razor-wire fence tops, and everything slows down. A momentary lull in the firefight ensues unexpectedly, and the fast-forward motion of the skirmish slams on its brakes. In her mind's eye, Lily sees the projectile arcing over their heads in extreme slow motion until it lands on the ground in front of a big Buick sedan, bouncing once and clattering under the car's dented front grillwork. The explosion that follows rocks the earth and sucks the air pressure out of the landscape, turning the pasture, just for an instant, into the surface of the sun. The grenade propels the 2,000-pound vehicle into the air, tearing shrapnel from its front half and sending every man and woman within a 50-yard radius falling to their feet. The boom shatters eardrums and rattles the trees and throws the governor and Gabe into different directions, each man sprawling to the ground and rolling. The governor slams into the undercarriage of the tank, his breath squeezed from his lungs as he catches a bleary glimpse from his one working eye of the projectile spray blooming in the sun, razor-sharp particles of the Buick's front end, ripping through the closest unsuspecting combatants. Jagged pieces of metal punch through portly old Charlie Baines, tearing a chunk out of his chest, lifting him 4 feet off the ground and sending him hurling backwards, arms pinwheeling, the gush of lifeblood enrobing him in liquid scarlet as he lands in the weeds, his heart shutting down and his life draining out of him before he even stops rolling. At the exact same moment, on the other side of the lot, a constellation of shards like tiny missiles have passed through Rudy Warburton's upper body, causing him to momentarily jitterbug in a gruesome death dance, his gun flying off, his deep whiskey-cured voice, the same ringside announcer's voice that proudly introduced the governor to crowds at the racetrack arena, now bellowing a death wail that sets the governor's teeth on edge. "Fuck!" The governor rolls out from under the tank, gasping for breath and seeing double through his lone eye. He tries to focus on the ground. His eye patch has come askew. Blades of crabgrass are in his hair, the stench of burning fuel in his nostrils. His body screams with pain, His bandaged face feels wet and hot, his phantom arm twisting and clawing at the air on its ghostly stump. Fuck! Fuck! He rises to his hands and knees, his ears ringing, his brain blazing with rage. He barely hears the return fire screaming over his head. Most of the surviving militia have ducked behind cover and have started firing wildly at the guard towers and the nooks across the prison grounds. The air ignites with tracers and ricochets. A total of 6 men lie in heaps around the blackened, scorched earth created by the grenade blast. Charlie is gone. Rudy, Teddy Granger, Bart, Daniel, and even Big Don Horgan, the wrestler. All gone. Mutilated to shreds by either gunfire or the deadly shrapnel. The governor sees Gabe on his back about 30 feet away, next to the flatbed, his head drooping, the concussion blast knocking him silly. Magnesium-hot rage courses through Philip as he struggles to his feet, wincing painfully as 50 cal bursts zing over his head. On top of a nearby flatbed truck cab, the machine gunner, Ben Buchholz, sprays the prison grounds furiously, without strategy or purpose. A quick glance at the southeast guard tower reveals puffs of white flame as a lone sniper rains pinpoint shots down on the convoy, the bullets ringing off fenders, shattering windshields and nipping at the heels of surviving militiamen. "Gabe!" The governor's voice sounds muffled and garbled to his own damaged ears. He manages to dart across the gap between the tank and the flatbed. By this point, Gabe is hauling himself back to his feet, blinking away the shock and pain. The governor reaches the fat man and grabs the nape of his turtleneck as though lifting a runt from a litter. "Get the fuck over here!" Philip drags Gabe across the wasted ground to the rear of the Abrams. "Come here!" The governor slams the portly Gabriel Harris against the back of the tank, knocking the wind out of Gabe's lungs as more high-velocity blasts ping and spark off the armored Abrams. "What the—" Gabe convulses with agony, jerking at the buzzsaw grind of the 50 cal 20 yards away. Bullets blaze around them for a moment, distracting them, making each of them duck and twitch with nervous tension, giving each man a weird sort of tunnel vision. Neither man sees the giant, battered, road-worn Winnebago camper roaring out of the trees directly to the west, skirting the edges of the battlefront in a fog bank of dust. In fact, at first, nobody in the attack force notices the new addition to the war zone. "We have got to rethink this fucking thing," Gabe proclaims a few seconds later in a strangled, exhausted voice, standing with the governor behind the armored tank while bullets whiz over their heads like wasps. Burning his gaze into the governor's solitary eye, speaking loudly enough to be heard above the noise of intermittent gunfire, Gabe deploys a tone of voice he has never used with the governor, a tone dripping with recrimination and anger. "Our people are scared shitless. They're getting the shit beat out of them, dropping like flies. You gotta do something, man. You gotta fucking take charge." The governor's left hand thrusts out and grabs Gabe by the throat, slamming the heavy-set man against the riveted hull of the Abrams. "Shut your fucking mouth, Gabe. We're not gonna pussy out this time. We're taking this place down. It's now or never." In that tense millisecond of a pause, Gabe stares wide-eyed at his boss, his mentor, his father figure, and a spark of shame kindles in Gabe's gaze. Neither man is aware of the Winnebago circling around the far western edge of the battlefield, far enough back to go unseen by most of the combatants, even those within the confines of the prison. The camper skids to a stop in a whirlwind of dust, and a figure appears like a specter on the roof, a solitary woman holding a sniper rifle. Okay, I'm sorry, Gabe babbles, both his gloved hands on the governor's wrist trying to wrench it off the ample girth of his bullish neck. Philip releases his grip. Gabe hyperventilates as he goes on raving over the noise of the firefight. "I'm just saying, we're getting beat up and we need a plan. We can't just keep hammering away at these cocksuckers without a— Shut the fuck up!" Philip Blake trains his blazing eye on the burly man and hears voices in his head, bubbling up from the dark catacombs of his brain. "Philip's dead. Gone. Philip is dead and buried. He's dust." And Philip flinches suddenly at the unexpected banshee shrieking in his head. "Shut up! Shut up!" Guns roar behind him, the crackle making him twitch, distracting him from the sight of the lone sniper standing on the roof of a rust-pocked camper hundreds of yards away, ghostly in the mirage of heat rays on the edge of the forest. Listen to me, you chicken shit fat body. We're not gonna fucking pull back again." Philip manages to bellow in a strangled voice, shoving Gabe across the slimy iron bulwark of the tank. "You understand? You got that? We're gonna end this thing now! Now!" Gabe backs away, rubbing his neck, blinking back tears of dread, looking suddenly like a little boy who would say or do anything to appease his abusive father, who would lie and steal and kill and rape and pillage, anything to please his angry parent and squelch the taunts of school kids who once called him a big tub of lard. The single shot that rings out from the west, a large-caliber bullet fired with the precision of a bee sting from the roof of a mobile home 350 yards away, hits the exposed part of Gabriel Harris's skull. The governor jerks back as Gabe's head erupts, washing the tank with a splash of gelatinous pink brain matter, forming a giant fuchsia blot on the iron. The governor's breath freezes in his lungs as Gabe teeters on wobbly legs for a moment, his glassy eyes fixed on Philip, a death stare reminiscent of a computer crashing, locked onto Philip's face, endlessly looking for a parent's approval that will never come. And then the big man collapses as if swooning. He hits the earth with a thud that wakes Philip up with the force of a cold slap. "Motherfuck!" Philip Blake lurches behind the tank and peers around the other side. Fuck! In quick stages he sees the distant Winnebago and glimpses the female figure standing boldly on the roof like some mythical creature, some Valkyrie swooping down from the heavens to aid and assist the inhabitants of the prison. And finally, he notices the pickup truck parked 50 feet off his left flank in the weeds. He sees Gus crouched behind the rear gate, firing an AR-15 at will, cursing and firing and cursing. "Gus!" Philip roars. "Get in your truck and drive it up that woman's ass! Right now!" It takes only a moment for Gus to see what the governor is talking about. With a terse nod, Gus gets moving, staying low and duck-walking around the other side of the Chevy S10 to the cab. He climbs behind the wheel, the windshield already cracked into a million diamond-bright shards of broken glass from all the gunfire. The tailpipe coughs vapor as Gus slams it into drive and blasts off toward the camper. The governor goes over to Gabe's body and untangles the Bushmaster rifle from the dead man's shoulder. And by the time Philip has straightened back up and taken stock of the battlefront, things have begun to go from bad to worse. From behind the tailgate of the M35, Lily Call watches the chain of events unravel and implode like a nuclear reaction, her lungs heaving for air, her heart banging as loudly as a timpani drum against her ribcage. She grips her Remington with sweat-sticky hands and jerks at the concussive blast of metal on metal thundering on the horizon to the west. She peers around the edge of the hatch just in time to see Gus ramming his pickup into the Winnebago, nearly breaking the massive camper in two. The impact sends particles of broken glass and shards of trim and metal fittings into the air and throws the sniper, a fair-haired woman in a ponytail and prison dungarees, cartwheeling off the roof and into the weeds on the edge of the woods. It's hard to tell at this distance, but it looks as though Gus has been hit, his door swinging open on impact, his squat body flopping out of the cab, a swirl of black smoke obscuring the crash site. Lily hears a strangled, maniacal laugh and glances to her left and sees the governor crouched behind the tank watching Gus's pickup and what's left of the Winnebago go up in a mushroom cloud of smoke and flame. "Take that, bitch! You fuck with us! Yeah, that's right!" He sounds to Lily like he's finally slipped his tether. Jesus, this is insane!" Lily ducks behind the hatch and jumps at a booming series of blasts that nearly pop her eardrums, the gunfire coming from inches away. She wrenches around and sees Austin, crouched behind the opposite end of the hatch, firing his Garand at the guard tower, the .308 shells booming and ringing. He's yelling something. Lily tries to get his attention. "Austin! Austin!" Fuckers are picking us off like flies! He shoots some more, glancing at Lily, shooting, then glancing at her again with eyes blazing. Come on! Lily, what's wrong? What are you doing? Save your ammo, pretty boy! What are you talking about? You're gonna— Lily starts to explain that they have a finite amount of rounds, and they need to get better positions, and these bastards could lob another grenade at any second, when the sound of the governor's voice rings out above the gunfire. She twists back around and sees him limping across the battlefield, his face filled with psychotic glee. Only a matter of time now! He walks toward a pair of shooters huddled behind a pile of fallen supply crates, firing blindly at the towers. We got 'em pinned down! Motherfuckers can't last! One of the shooters behind the crates, an older man with thinning hair and yellow aviator sunglasses, looks up from his scope when a round hits him in the left eye. The blast shatters the aviator lens and bursts out of the back of his skull. He convulses backward, his rifle flying out of his hands, his brain matter spraying the weeds behind him, as he collapses less than 10 feet from where the governor is shuffling along. We got them right where we want 'em! Philip strides along behind the row of vehicles.